So, remember Iran? No? You have a very short memory. Well, don't worry. The smorgasbord of former military, current military and military-type advisors are soon to be flooding back into your feeds, looming large once again. Oil prices are bouncing around, and by bouncing I mean rocketing upwards. Every thumbnail will feature a shocked face, a mushroom cloud, and the words, "This changes everything." So, should you panic? Well, that's what we're here to find out. As a recap, it all started because Iran was supposedly getting too close to building a nuclear weapon, which, according to various intelligence assessments, they hadn't actually decided to build. Now, obviously, the solution to preventing them building one was to tear up the agreement that limited their ability to build one. A bold strategy. A bit like cancelling your gym membership because you're worried you might accidentally become too fit and end up stuffing your face whole with even more snacks, thanks to your newly minted guns. Some people call that four-dimensional chess. Others call it, I reckon I could negotiate a better deal than the last guy did and probably squeeze in a few golf courses into the agreement while I'm at it. Negotiations didn't exactly go to plan. So America opened proceedings with the age-old debating tactic of sprinting across the room, kicking your opponent as hard as possible in the nuts and immediately declaring victory. As it turns out, declaring mission accomplished isn't actually one of the recognized victory conditions. So, did that solve everything? Well, no. Hence the existence of this video. There was bombing. Quite a lot of bombing. Apparently enough bombing to completely destroy everything everywhere in Iran. Military briefings began sounding suspiciously like someone explaining why their homework wasn't finished. Victory after victory was declared, roughly 37 of them by my count. Then, in what can be described only as an act of sympathy or possibly boredom, Iran agreed to talk about surrender terms with America, which naturally was immediately declared victory number 38. But it would seem America misread the memo and didn't understand it was them who were surrendering. Despite what some commentators describe as little more than love taps continuing to be exchanged afterwards, both sides broadly held steady, while also quietly ignoring the rather sizable mess happening everywhere else in the region at that point. I'll skip it, not because it isn't important, because if we tried to cover every moving part in the Middle East, this video would qualify as a box set. Now, despite officially being in a prolonged period of national mourning, the 28-day funeral, well not quite, Iran still somehow found enough spare time to harass civilian shipping through the strait. Because apparently grief and maritime intimidation are not mutually exclusive. MaritimeTraffic.com is being DDoSed again by thousands of people desperately refreshing the exact position of any random triangle available. Normally a container ship that hasn't received this much attention since it left the shipyard. It becomes less a cargo vessel and more a sign of hope for oil. And of course, this all starts affecting global oil prices. Oil is now going back up again, on paper, although obviously oil isn't on paper, oil is on boats. People buy it on paper, with paper, using money that's increasingly only exists as a number on a screen. Then the oil goes into machines, then into your car, then into the cost of transporting goods, then into the price of almost everything you were already annoyed about paying a lot for in the first place. So what does all this actually mean? It means you have less money, which is usually bad, although occasionally economists will explain that having less money is actually good, depending on inflation, and bond yields, and interest rates, and consumer confidence, and GDP, and the phase of the moon. The real problem is when some things cost less money, other things cost more money, and you still have exactly the same amount of money. That's when the friction really starts. And by friction, I mean drinking cheap alcohol in a child's paddling pool in your underwear. It's not a summer holiday you'll be sharing photos of with the relatives. Essentially, it's all pretty complicated. Most people just want to get on with their daily lives, watch the World Cup, or, just as importantly, get on with their daily lives and ignore the World Cup. People keep asking, should we be worried? Honestly, nobody seems entirely sure. Iran's military response has actually been considerably more restrained than many people predicted. Meanwhile, countries around the Gulf are becoming increasingly irritated, because from their perspective, they didn't exactly volunteer to become the backdrop for somebody else's geopolitical midlife crisis. So why is any of this happening? Excellent question, gold star. Depending on who you ask, it's about them not having a nuke, regional security, deterrence, regional influence, or whatever phrase polls best like this week. Personally, and this is satire before anyone writes me an angry email, I sometimes wonder whether the defence industry simply noticed the missiles they were selling had plateaued. The awkward thing about expensive, explodey things is that unlike toilet paper, people don't keep buying them every week. Eventually demand slows, and the only reliable way of increasing demand is convincing people they urgently need more expensive explodey things. Unless, of course, scientists discover an extremely aggressive species of heavily armoured penguins. Imagine it, thousands of militant penguins occupying Antarctica. Suddenly, everything would make sense. Aircraft carriers, Tomahawk missiles, strategic bombings against the birds. The shareholders would rejoice. Anyway, then came the Memorandum of Understanding, which everyone hailed as progress, except it wasn't actually a peace deal. It was more an agreement to temporarily stop trying to kick each other in the nuts long enough to catch breath, uncross eyes, and discuss a timetable for maybe going back to more kicking. Diplomacy at its finest. Then everyone started arguing about Iran's missile stockpile. They've lost 80%. Well, no, 50. No, hardly any. No, they've actually made more. At some point, intelligence estimates became less like intelligence and more like trying to count Pringles while somebody keeps eating them. So where does this leave us? Well, the Memorandum of Understanding appears to have achieved exactly what memorandums often achieve. Not very much at all. Tensions have risen again. Ships are still being aggressively harassed. Oil traders are having emotional breakdowns every other Tuesday morning. News channels have started talking about Iran again. Military YouTubers have bought new microphones and RGB lighting setups. MarineTraffic.com is melting down with refreshes, and we're all pretending we knew exactly where the Strait of Hormuz was before any of this started. So, should you panic? Not really. This is what I describe as a semi-panic. Carry on with your day, go to work, walk the dog, as long as you have one, have a coffee, watch the World Cup, or don't. Now, the only problem would be if things all kicked off again and rockets were flying, and America said the MOU was over. Maybe people calling over scum. But none of that is likely to happen in a professional political setting. Nobody would try the handshake kick nuts strategy twice. Or would they?